Her skin held a blue-silver luminescence, and her hair seemed to be composed of the same flowing light patterns that decorated the crystal exterior. Her eyes, when they focused on him, were the deep purple of space between stars. "I am Seraleth, Empress of the Zephyrian Empire, ruler of 417 worlds, commander of fleets that span 3 galactic arms." She paused, and Marcus felt the weight of that gaze pressing down on him like a physical thing. "And you, Marcus Chen, possess something that makes you the most valuable being in the known universe." Marcus laughed, a short, sharp sound that bordered on hysteria. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm a data analyst. I spend my days looking at spreadsheets and my nights watching Netflix. There's absolutely nothing special about me. That is where you are wrong." Seraleth moved closer, and Marcus felt his apartment grow smaller around them, as if her presence was somehow expanding to fill all available space. "Your species has a saying. Appearances can be deceiving. Your genetic structure contains a sequence that has taken my scientists 3 of your decades to locate. A sequence that represents the salvation of my people." The crystal shell around Seraleth began to shimmer and fade, revealing her true form. She was breathtaking in an alien way that made Marcus's human brain struggle to process what he was seeing. 7 feet tall, with proportions that were somehow both familiar and completely foreign. Her movements carried the unconscious grace of someone who had never questioned their right to command, and when she spoke, Marcus found himself listening despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "My people are dying," she continued, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been vulnerability, though it disappeared so quickly Marcus wondered if he'd imagined it. "For the past 2 centuries, we've been plagued by a genetic degradation that our finest minds cannot cure. Our birth rate has declined by 90%. Our lifespans, once measured in millennia, now barely exceed 500 years. At current projections, the Zephyrian Empire will cease to exist within 3 generations. Marcus felt his knees buckle and he sank onto his couch, staring up at this impossible being who claimed to rule hundreds of worlds. "What does that have to do with me? Your DNA contains antibodies and genetic markers that have evolved in response to thousands of years of viral exposure on your world. Earth's biosphere has been a crucible that has forged immunity patterns unlike anything we have encountered in our exploration of the galaxy." Seraleth's eyes seemed to glow brighter as she spoke. "When combined with Zephyrian genetic material, your human sequences could produce offspring with immunity to the plague that is destroying us." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You want me to— What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I am asking you to come with me. To leave your world behind and help me save mine." Seraleth extended one hand, and Marcus could see that her fingers ended in what looked like claws, though they seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as her earlier shell. "In return, I offer you power beyond your comprehension. You would become my consort, second only to me in the greatest empire the galaxy has ever known. Your descendants would rule worlds. Your name would be remembered long after your Earth's sun burns cold." Marcus stared at her outstretched hand, his mind reeling. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he'd get approval for his vacation days. Now an alien empress was offering him the chance to help save an entire species and rule a galactic empire. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Seraleth's expression didn't change, but something in the air around them grew colder. "Refusal's not an option I am prepared to consider. My people's survival takes precedence over individual choice. However, I would prefer your cooperation to your coercion. You're threatening me. I am stating facts." Seraleth lowered her hand, but continued to study him with those unsettling purple eyes. "Your genetic material is too valuable to leave on a primitive world where it serves no purpose greater than producing more humans to consume resources and wage petty wars." Marcus felt a flash of anger cut through his fear. "Primitive? Lady, we may not have crystal bodies and space empires, but we've done pretty well for ourselves. We've got art, music, literature, science. We've put people on the moon and sent robots to Mars. We've mapped the human genome and cured diseases. Maybe we're not as advanced as you, but we're not primitive." Something flickered across Seraleth's features, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw surprise. "You speak of your species' accomplishments with pride." "Of course I do. They're amazing accomplishments. We did all of that in just a few thousand years of recorded history. Your empire might be bigger and older, but we got where we are on our own, without anyone giving us a head start." Seraleth was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus squirm. Interesting. My research into your species focused primarily on genetic and biological factors. I did not expect to encounter such loyalty to a world you would be leaving behind. Because loyalty is something you can't measure in a genetic scan, Marcus said, surprising himself with his boldness. It's something you have to experience to understand. Perhaps. Saralith began to move around his living room, examining his possessions with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying specimens. She picked up a framed photograph from his bookshelf, one of Marcus with his parents and sister at last Christmas, all of them laughing at some joke he couldn't even remember now. These are your genetic relatives? My family, Marcus corrected. Yes. You are concerned about leaving them. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. Wouldn't you be? If someone showed up and asked you to leave your home forever to go live on an alien world, wouldn't you think about the people you'd never see again? Saralaith set the photograph down carefully, but not before Marcus noticed her studying the faces in the image with something that might have been curiosity. Zephyrians do not form the same emotional attachments that appear to characterize your species. We mate for genetic optimization and child-rearing purposes, but we do not experience what you would call family bonds. Marcus paused, searching for the right words. That sounds lonely. Loneliness is an inefficient emotional state that interferes with logical decision-making, but there was something in Saraleth's tone that suggested the words were more recited than felt. My scientists believe it may be one of the factors that has contributed to our genetic decline. Emotional attachments can lead to poor mate selection. Marcus stood up, ignoring the sting of ceramic cuts on his feet. Or maybe emotional attachments are what give life meaning. Maybe that's why humans have been so successful, despite being, as you put it, primitive. We don't just survive. We find reasons to want to live. Saraleth turned to face him fully, and Marcus realized that for the first time since she'd appeared, he had her complete attention. Explain. Look, I'm no philosopher, but humans don't just eat and reproduce and die. We create things that outlast us. We form connections with each other that make us stronger than we could be alone. We take risks for people we love, and we make sacrifices for people we've never met. Maybe that's inefficient from a purely logical standpoint, but it's also what pushes us to be better than we are. You speak as if these qualities could be beneficial to an empire. Marcus felt a strange moment of clarity, as if all the pieces of an impossible puzzle were suddenly falling into place. Maybe they could be. You said your people are dying out, right? Maybe it's not just because of some genetic plague. Maybe it's because you've optimized out everything that makes life worth living. Maybe you need more than just my genetic material. Maybe you need what makes humans human. Saraleth was silent for so long that Marcus began to wonder if he'd overstepped some boundary and was about to be vaporized by alien technology. But when she spoke, her voice carried a note he hadn't heard before. Uncertainty. My scientists did not predict that you would present philosophical challenges to our understanding of genetic optimization. Your scientists probably never talked to a human before they decided what was best for them, Marcus said. Look, I'm not saying I won't help you. The idea of an entire species dying out is horrible, and if there's something I can do to prevent that, I want to help. But I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. And I need to know that you understand that you're not just getting genetic material, you're getting a human being with everything that entails. Saraleth moved to his window and looked out at the Seattle skyline, the city lights reflecting off her metallic skin in patterns that reminded Marcus of the Aurora Borealis. Your world is smaller than my smallest colony, yet it has produced a genetic sequence that could save an empire spanning 3 galactic arms. Perhaps there is more to study here than simple biology. There's always more to study, Marcus said, moving to stand beside her at the window. That's another thing about humans. We're curious. We want to understand how things work, why they happen, what else is possible. Sometimes that curiosity gets us into trouble, but it's also how we grow. Curiosity, Saraleth repeated the word as if testing its weight. My people abandoned curiosity eons ago in favor of certainty and control. Maybe that's part of the problem. Saraleth turned to look at him, and Marcus realized that despite her alien appearance, her expression was one he recognized. The look of someone who had been carrying a burden alone for too long and was finally considering that there might be another way. If you came with me, she said slowly, would you be willing to share more than just your genetic material? Would you be willing to share your perspective? Marcus considered this. The offer was insane, impossible, terrifying. He would be leaving everything he knew to travel to alien worlds with a being who could probably kill him with a thought. But he would also be helping to save an entire species, and maybe, just maybe, helping them find something they had lost along the way. I'd be willing to try, he said. But I have conditions. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Saraleth's features. You would attempt to negotiate with an empress who commands fleets capable of destroying your world? I would attempt to have a conversation with someone who needs my help, Marcus replied steadily. Because that's what this is, isn't it? You need me, not just my DNA, but me. Otherwise, you could have just taken a genetic sample and left. Saraleth studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. State your conditions. Marcus took a deep breath, hardly believing what he was about to say. First, I want to be able to communicate with Earth. I want my family to know I'm alive and that I chose to leave. Second, I want to be treated as a partner in this, not just genetic material. If I'm going to help save your people, I want to be involved in how that happens. And third, he paused, gathering his courage. I want you to promise me that humanity won't be harmed because of my decision, that choosing to help you won't make Earth a target. These are reasonable requests, Saraleth said, and Marcus felt a surge of relief that surprised him. I accept your conditions. Just like that? Marcus Chen? I have spent 3 decades searching for a solution to my people's extinction. I have conquered worlds and destroyed fleets in pursuit of resources that might extend our survival. You are the first hope I have found in 2 centuries of searching. I am not about to jeopardize that hope over negotiable details. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. When do we leave? Now. Saraleth raised her hand, and the air around them began to shimmer again. My ship is in orbit. The transport beam will take us there in moments. Wait, Marcus said, suddenly panicking. I need to pack. I need to leave messages for people. All of your material needs will be provided for, Saraleth interrupted. As for messages, you will be able to send communications to your family once we reach my ship. The shimmer in the air was growing brighter, and Marcus could feel a strange tingling sensation creeping up from his feet. This was it, the point of no return. In moments he would leave Earth behind, possibly forever, to begin a journey that would either save an alien empire or get him killed in ways he couldn't imagine. But as the transport beam began to take effect, Marcus found himself thinking not of the dangers ahead, but of the photographs Saraleth had examined, his family's faces, laughing together at a moment he couldn't remember. Maybe she was right that emotional attachments were inefficient, but as the last familiar sight of his apartment faded around him, Marcus Chen decided that if he was going to help save the Zephyrian Empire, he was going to do it as a human being, with all the inefficiency and emotional attachment that entailed. The galaxy was about to get its first real introduction to humanity. Marcus just hoped they were both ready for what that meant. The transport beam deposited Marcus onto a surface that felt like standing on solidified starlight. He stumbled, his legs weak from the strange sensation of molecular transportation, and found himself gripping what appeared to be a railing made of the same crystal material as Saraleth's earlier form. Around him stretched a chamber so vast that its far walls disappeared into a soft, pearl-like luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Dominion," Saraleth said, her voice now carrying harmonic undertones that suggested the ship itself was somehow amplifying her words. "Flagship of the Imperial Fleet, and my personal vessel for the past 4 centuries." Marcus straightened slowly, his eyes adjusting to the ambient light, and felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber around them was beautiful beyond description, but it was a cold, mathematical beauty that spoke of form following function with perfect emotionless precision. Geometric patterns flowed across the walls in constant motion, and the ceiling arched impossibly high overhead, displaying what appeared to be a real-time view of space beyond the ship. "It's incredible," Marcus said, and meant it, even as he felt a strange sense of unease settling in his stomach. "But it feels empty," Saraleth finished for him. "Yes. Zephyrian architecture prioritizes efficiency and functionality. We have found that excessive ornamentation leads to distraction and decreased productivity." Marcus turned in a slow circle, taking in the vast space. Despite its obvious grandeur, there was something sterile about it, as if it had been designed by beings who understood beauty only as a mathematical concept. "Where is everyone? This ship must be massive, but I don't see any crew." "The Eternal Dominion is operated primarily by artificial intelligence systems. My personal staff consists of 12 advisors and specialists, all of whom are currently in stasis during our journey. Their biological needs are inefficient during long-distance travel." "You travel alone?" "I find solitude conducive to strategic thinking." Saraleth began walking toward what appeared to be an archway that formed itself in the chamber wall as they approached. "However, your presence will require certain adjustments to the ship's standard operating procedures. Come, I will show you to your quarters." Marcus followed her through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they moved, walls flowing like liquid crystal to form passages perfectly sized for their journey. The technology was clearly far beyond anything Earth had achieved, but there was something unsettling about its seamless perfection. It felt less like moving through a ship and more like being inside a vast living entity that anticipated their every need. "Siralith," Marcus said as they walked. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask. Earlier you said you've been ruling for centuries." "How old are you exactly?" "I have held the imperial throne for 843 of your years. My personal age is approximately 1,500 years." Marcus nearly stumbled. 1,500 years? You're older than some human civilizations? Yes. Though that lifespan would once have been considered brief by Zephyrian standards. My great-grandmother ruled for nearly 3 millennia before the genetic degradation began to affect our longevity. They passed through another flowing archway into a chamber that was smaller but no less impressive than the first. This one appeared to be some kind of observation deck, with transparent walls offering an unobstructed view of space. Earth hung in the distance, a blue marble against the cosmic backdrop, and Marcus felt a sudden sharp pang of homesickness that surprised him with its intensity. "Your world is aesthetically pleasing," Saraleth observed, following his gaze. "Our initial surveys noted its unusual biodiversity and environmental variety. Most inhabited worlds develop along more specialized lines." "It's beautiful," Marcus said softly, watching continents wheel slowly past as the ship maintained its orbit. "I've never seen it from this perspective before." "You regret your decision?" "I don't regret it, but I'm going to miss it. Does that make sense to you?" Saraleth was quiet for a long moment, studying the planet below them. "My homeworld is Zephyros Prime, capital of the Empire and seat of power for our species for over 10 millennia. When I look at it, I see strategic importance, resource allocation, and political significance. I do not experience what you call missing." "Have you ever left it for extended periods?" "Frequently. Imperial duties require constant travel throughout the territories. I have spent years at a time on campaign fleets or diplomatic missions. But you've never missed home? Never felt that pull to return to familiar places and people? The concept is foreign to me." Saraleth turned away from the observation window, and Marcus thought he detected something in her expression that might have been confusion. "Zephyrians do not form attachments to locations or individuals that would generate such feelings." Marcus joined her as they continued through the ship, passing chambers filled with technology that hummed and pulsed with alien purpose. "But you must have some kind of social structure. Friends, colleagues, people you enjoy spending time with? I have advisors whose counsel I value and military commanders whose competence I respect, but enjoyment of social interaction is not a factor in Zephyrian relationships. We interact based on necessity and efficiency. That sounds incredibly lonely. You have said this before." "I do not understand why you fixate on this concept." Marcus stopped walking, causing Saraleth to turn and face him. "It's one of the worst things humans can experience. The idea of living for 1,500 years without ever forming emotional connections with other people. It's hard for me to imagine." "Pain serves no productive purpose," Saraleth said, but there was something in her tone that suggested uncertainty. "Emotional connections create vulnerabilities that can be exploited by enemies. They also create strengths that can't be found anywhere else." Marcus leaned against the wall, which immediately adjusted itself to provide comfortable support. "When humans form emotional bonds, we become more than the sum of our individual parts. We take risks for each other, we share knowledge and resources, we inspire each other to be better than we thought we could be. And these bonds are formed through what process? Shared experiences, usually. Common interests, mutual respect, trust that builds over time, sometimes just spending time together and discovering that you enjoy each other's company." Saraleth considered this. "My interactions with other Zephyrians are based on clearly defined hierarchies and functional relationships. There is no need for trust because everyone's role is precisely specified. But don't you ever want to talk to someone just because you like talking to them? Not because you need information or have to give orders, but just because it feels good?" "I am beginning to understand why my scientists classified human emotional responses as chaotic and inefficient," Saraleth said, but Marcus detected what might have been amusement in her voice. "Your species appears to derive satisfaction from activities that serve no measurable purpose." "Some of the most important things in life serve no measurable purpose," Marcus replied. "That doesn't make them less valuable. They resumed their journey through the ship, eventually arriving at a set of quarters that had obviously been prepared for Marcus's arrival. The chambers were spacious and comfortable, with furnishings that somehow managed to be both alien and familiar. A large window offered another view of Earth, and Marcus found himself drawn to it immediately. These rooms had been configured based on our analysis of human physiological and psychological needs, Saraleth explained. The atmosphere, temperature, and gravitational fields have been adjusted to match your homeworld specifications. If anything requires modification, simply speak your needs aloud and the ship's intelligence will make appropriate adjustments. Marcus explored the space, noting the bed that looked like it would be comfortable for a human, the area that appeared to be designed for meals, and a section that might have been intended as a workspace. Everything was perfectly functional, but like the rest of the ship, it felt somehow sterile. "Saraleth," he said, turning back to find her watching him with that intense, evaluating gaze, "can I ask you about something that's been bothering me?" "Proceed." "You said you've been searching for a solution to your people's genetic problem for decades. You've conquered worlds and destroyed fleets. That suggests you're willing to use force when necessary. Why didn't you just take what you needed from me? Why offer me a choice at all?" Saraleth moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the transparent material. "Initially, that was my intention. Our genetic analysis suggested that simple biological material would be sufficient for our purposes. However, further study revealed complexities in human genetic expression that require active participation." "What kind of complexities?" "Your species' genetic adaptability appears to be linked to environmental and emotional factors in ways we did not anticipate. Stress, isolation, and other negative emotional states can suppress the very genetic responses we need to access. For the process to be successful, you must be—" She paused, searching for words. "Healthy. Content. Actively engaged in the process rather than merely a passive donor." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying that if you had just kidnapped me and forced me to participate, it wouldn't have worked? Correct? Human genetic expression is far more dynamic than Zephyrian. Your DNA literally changes based on your experiences and emotional state. This is why your species has been able to adapt to such a wide range of environments on your world, but it also means that achieving our goals requires your willing cooperation. So, when you offered me partnership and respect, you weren't just being nice. You were being practical." "Initially, yes." Saraleth turned back to him, and Marcus was surprised to see what looked like genuine thoughtfulness in her expression. "However, our conversation today has introduced variables I had not considered." "What kind of variables?" "You suggested that my people's decline might be due to more than simple genetic factors, that our optimization might have removed essential elements that contribute to species vitality. If this hypothesis has validity, then understanding human emotional and social structures becomes not merely practical but essential to our survival." Marcus sank into a chair that immediately adjusted itself to support his body perfectly. "You want to study human emotions? I want to understand why a species with such obvious inefficiencies has proven so remarkably adaptable and successful. Your world has produced more genetic diversity in a few million years than most species achieve over tens of millions of years. There must be underlying factors that our analysis has missed, and you think those factors might be emotional rather than just biological?" "I think," Saraleth said slowly, "that I may have significantly underestimated the complexity of what I was asking when I invited you to join me." Marcus laughed, surprising both of them. "Welcome to humanity, Empress. We're full of surprises." Saraleth studied him with obvious puzzlement. "You appear to be pleased by this complexity rather than frustrated by it." "Of course I am. If this was simple, you could have solved it already with your advanced technology. The fact that it's complicated means you actually need what humans have to offer. It means this partnership might be more equal than either of us initially thought." "Partnership," Saraleth repeated the word as if testing its meaning. "You believe that effective relationships require equality between participants? Not perfect equality, but mutual respect and shared investment in the outcome. If one person has all the power and the other person has none, it's not a partnership, it's exploitation. Even when one participant is clearly superior in knowledge, technology, and experience?" "Especially then," Marcus said firmly, "because the person with all the advantages needs to choose to share them. That's what makes it meaningful." Saraleth was silent for several minutes, staring out at the stars beyond Earth's atmosphere. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note Marcus hadn't heard before, uncertainty mixed with what might have been curiosity. My advisors warned me that involving humans directly in Imperial affairs could introduce unpredictable elements into carefully optimized systems. I'm beginning to suspect they may have underestimated the scope of that unpredictability. Is that a problem? I am not certain. Saraleth moved toward the chamber's exit, then paused. Marcus Chen, tomorrow we will begin the journey to the Zephyrian core worlds. The voyage will take several weeks, during which time you will be my only conscious companion aboard this vessel. I propose we use that time to conduct an experiment. What kind of experiment? You will teach me about human emotional and social structures, and I will share with you the history and challenges facing the Zephyrian Empire. We will attempt to determine whether your hypothesis about the relationship between emotional connection and species vitality has merit. Marcus felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You want to learn how to be friends? I want to learn whether friendship, as you define it, could be beneficial to an empire spanning 3 galactic arms. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. No, Saraleth agreed, they are not, but perhaps understanding one will illuminate the other. After she left, Marcus stood alone in his quarters looking out at Earth as it slowly receded in the distance. He had agreed to help save an alien empire, but increasingly he suspected that the challenge would be far more complex than simply providing genetic material. He was going to have to help an ancient, powerful species rediscover something they had optimized out of their existence centuries ago, the messy, inefficient, absolutely essential human capacity for connection. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers he couldn't imagine, but as Marcus watched his homeworld disappear into the cosmic night, he felt a strange sense of optimism. Humans had always been at their best when facing impossible odds and unsolvable problems. This was definitely going to qualify as both. Marcus had been aboard the Eternal Dominion for 3 days when he realized that Saraleth didn't sleep. Not in any way that humans would recognize as sleep, anyway. She entered a state she called regenerative stasis for exactly 4 hours every 24-hour cycle, during which her crystalline form became completely motionless and her inner light dimmed to almost nothing. But it happened while standing perfectly upright in what appeared to be a meditation chamber, and she emerged from it exactly as she had entered, alert, focused, and completely unchanged. It's efficient, she explained when Marcus asked about it during their 4th morning together, using the ship's version of breakfast as an opportunity to discuss their respective biological needs. Sleep, as practiced by organic species, requires extended periods of vulnerability and unconsciousness. Zephyrian regeneration maintains partial awareness of surroundings while allowing cellular repair processes to function. Marcus watched her move around the ship's dining area, her motions fluid and precise as she prepared what passed for food in her culture. The substance she had offered him was nutritionally perfect according to the ship's analysis of human dietary requirements, but it tasted like absolutely nothing and had the consistency of gelatin. But do you dream? Marcus asked, poking at his breakfast with obvious reluctance. Dream? Saraleth paused in her preparations, fixing him with that intense stare that he was beginning to recognize as her version of confusion. Define this concept. Dreams are experiences your mind creates while you're unconscious. Sometimes they're memories, sometimes they're fantasies, sometimes they're just random images and emotions strung together. They don't usually make logical sense, but they can be incredibly vivid. What purpose do they serve? Marcus considered this. We're not entirely sure. Some scientists think dreams help process information and emotions from the day. Others think they're just random neural activity. But for most humans, dreams are important. They can be beautiful, terrifying, inspiring, or just plain weird. Sometimes people get their best ideas from dreams. Zephyrians do not experience such phenomena during regeneration. Our minds remain focused on predetermined processing tasks, analyzing the day's information, optimizing decision matrices, calculating probable outcomes for ongoing projects. That sounds incredibly boring. It is efficient. Marcus set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair, which immediately adjusted to provide optimal support. Saraleth, can I ask you a personal question?
You may ask. In all your 1,500 years of existence, have you ever done anything just because it was fun?
Not because it served a purpose or accomplished a goal, but just because it made you feel good. Saraleth was silent for a long moment, her luminous eyes fixed on something beyond Marcus's shoulder. Define fun. Enjoyable activities that don't necessarily serve a practical purpose. Playing games, listening to music, spending time with people you like, exploring new places just to see what they're like. Things that make you happy. I do not understand the distinction between activities that serve practical purposes and activities that create positive emotional states. If an activity creates positive emotions, does that not serve the practical purpose of maintaining psychological health? Marcus felt a surge of excitement as he recognized the opening for a teaching moment. Okay, that's actually a great point. The difference is in the intention. When humans do things for fun, we're not thinking about the practical benefits of it. We're just enjoying the experience for its own sake. Provide an example. Marcus thought for a moment, then smiled. Music. Humans love music. We spend enormous amounts of time and resources creating it, listening to it, sharing it with each other. From a purely practical standpoint, it serves no essential survival function. But it makes us feel connected to each other and to something larger than ourselves. Music. Sir Aleth repeated the word carefully. I am familiar with this concept from our cultural analysis of your species. Organized sound patterns that create emotional responses. Have you ever listened to human music? I have analyzed various samples as part of my research into human psychology. Analyzed it. But have you ever just listened to it? Just sat quietly and let yourself experience it without trying to understand its function or categorize its effects? That would be inefficient, Marcus grinned. That's exactly my point. Want to try an experiment? Sarah Leith's expression shifted to something that might have been wariness. What sort of experiment? I want to play you a song. Not for analysis, not for research, just for the experience of listening to it. And I want you to try not thinking about it scientifically. Just let yourself feel whatever you feel. This exercise serves what purpose? See, you're doing it already. You're looking for the practical purpose, instead of just being curious about the experience. Saralith considered this. You believe that purposeless activities serve a purpose that cannot be achieved through purposeful activities. I think some of the most important things in life can only be discovered when you stop looking for them deliberately. This is paradoxical. Yeah, Marcus said cheerfully. Humans love paradoxes. We're weird that way. After a moment of contemplation that Marcus was beginning to recognize as Saralith's way of making decisions, she nodded. I will attempt your experiment. Marcus closed his eyes and addressed the ship's AI. Computer, can you access Earth's communication networks and download music files? Music files accessible, came the reply in a voice that was completely neutral and somehow distinctly artificial. Specify parameters. Something beautiful and simple. Maybe classical. How about Pachelbel's Canon in D? Moments later, the ship's air itself seemed to come alive with sound. The music emerged not from any visible speakers, but from the very walls and space around them, creating an acoustic environment so rich and detailed that Marcus felt as if he were sitting in a concert hall. He opened his eyes to watch Sarlath's reaction. Her luminous form had gone completely still, and the patterns of light beneath her skin had shifted to rhythms that seemed to match the music's progression. For nearly 5 minutes she remained motionless as the cannon played around them. When the final notes faded into silence, Saralith remained frozen for several additional moments. Then she turned to Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. What did you experience? Marcus asked softly. Saralith paused, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed genuinely uncertain about something. The sound patterns created changes in my neural activity that were not related to information processing or strategic analysis. How did it make you feel? I do not have adequate vocabulary to describe the sensation. It was not unpleasant, but it was unlike any state I have previously experienced. There were moments when I was not thinking about anything at all except the patterns themselves. Marcus smiled. That's exactly what music is supposed to do. It takes you out of your normal thought processes and lets you experience something purely aesthetic. Is this what you call beauty? Part of it, beauty is about experiencing something that moves you emotionally without requiring logical justification for why it affects you. Saralith moved to the chamber's large window, looking out at the stars streaming past as the ship traveled faster than light toward the Zephyrian core worlds. My people abandoned aesthetic pursuits approximately 2,000 years ago. We determined that they were inefficient uses of resources that could be better allocated to practical endeavors. What did you use to create? Our historical records mention various forms of artistic expression. Crystalline sculptures that captured and refracted light in complex patterns. Musical compositions that were mathematically derived from astronomical phenomena. Architecture that served spiritual as well as functional purposes. What happened to it all? It was optimized out of existence. Art became decoration, decoration became ornamentation, ornamentation became inefficiency. Each generation of Zephyrians became more focused on practical achievement and less interested in activities that served no measurable purpose.
Marcus joined her at the window.
And when did your genetic problems start? Approximately 2,000 years ago. Saraleth's voice carried a note of surprise, as if she had just made a connection she hadn't seen before. You believe there is a correlation? I don't know enough about your biology to say for certain. But in humans, there's definitely a connection between emotional health and physical health. People who are isolated, depressed, or living without meaning tend to have more health problems and shorter lifespans. Maybe Zephyrians aren't as different from humans as you think. You are suggesting that our genetic decline may be caused by spiritual rather than biological factors. I'm suggesting that maybe they're the same thing. Maybe the genetic changes are symptoms of a deeper problem. Saraleth turned away from the window to study him with that intense, evaluating gaze. If this hypothesis is correct, then saving my people will require more than simply introducing human genetic material into our reproduction process. It might require helping them remember how to be happy. Happiness is inefficient. Is extinction efficient? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Saraleth was quiet for several minutes, her inner light pulsing in patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as indicative of intense thought. Marcus, she said finally, I need you to understand the magnitude of what you are suggesting. The Zephyrian Empire spans 417 worlds. Our population numbers in the trillions. Our economic, military, and political systems have been optimized for efficiency over millennia. You are proposing that we fundamentally alter the basic assumptions that govern our entire civilization. I'm not proposing anything, Marcus replied. I'm just sharing observations about how humans work and wondering whether some of those principles might apply to other species as well. But if you are correct, then implementing the necessary changes would require... Saraleth paused, and Marcus could almost see her mind working through the implications. It would require teaching an entire species to value things they have been conditioned for centuries to see as wasteful and counterproductive. Is that impossible? From a logistical standpoint, yes. From a practical standpoint, it would destabilize every institution that maintains imperial order. The social and political upheaval would be unprecedented. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. But you're the Empress. If anyone has the authority to implement that kind of change, it would be you. Authority is not the same as ability. And even if I possessed both, the question remains, would I be helping my people or destroying them? There's only one way to find out. Saraleth's laugh was a sound Marcus had never heard before, musical and genuinely amused. You are suggesting that I conduct an empire-wide experiment in emotional optimization based on the cultural practices of a species we have known for less than a week. When you put it that way, it does sound kind of insane, Marcus admitted. But consider the alternative. If your current approach continues, your people will be extinct in a few generations anyway. At least this way you're trying something different. And if the experiment fails, then you'll have learned something valuable about what doesn't work. That's still progress. Saraleth was quiet for a long time, staring out at the star-filled void beyond the ship. When she spoke again, her voice carried a thoughtful quality that Marcus hadn't heard before. My advisors would classify this conversation as evidence that I made an error in judgment by allowing human perspectives to influence imperial planning. Are you having second thoughts about bringing me along? No, Saraleth said, surprising him with the firmness of her response. I am having first thoughts about possibilities I had never previously considered. For 800 years I have ruled based on the assumption that efficiency and optimization were the highest virtues an empire could pursue. You are suggesting that survival itself may require accepting inefficiency as a necessary cost of vitality. I'm suggesting that maybe some things that look like inefficiency are actually investments in long-term sustainability. Provide another example. Marcus thought for a moment. Love. From a purely logical standpoint, the human practice of forming exclusive pair bonds for emotional rather than purely reproductive reasons is incredibly inefficient. It means people sometimes choose partners who aren't genetically optimal, and they waste enormous amounts of time and energy on relationships that don't always produce offspring. And yet, your species continues to practice this behavior despite its obvious inefficiencies. Because people who love and are loved tend to be healthier, happier, more creative, and more resilient than people who aren't. The efficiency cost is more than made up for by the benefits to individual and social well-being. You believe Zephyrians should learn to experience love? I believe Zephyrians should have the option to experience love, and friendship, and artistic appreciation, and curiosity, and all the other supposedly inefficient emotions that make life worth living. Saraleth moved away from the window, beginning to pace around the chamber with restless energy. The practical implementation challenges would be enormous. Zephyrian society has no existing structures to support or encourage emotional bonding. We would need to develop entirely new social institutions, modify our educational systems, alter our work allocation protocols, but it's possible. Theoretically, but it would take generations to achieve meaningful results. Marcus felt a sudden insight. Unless you had help from someone who already understands how these systems work. Saralith stopped pacing and fixed him with that intense stare. You are proposing that humans serve as teachers and guides for an empire-wide cultural transformation. I'm proposing that maybe this partnership could be bigger than either of us initially imagined. You need genetic material to save your species, and humans could provide that. But maybe we could also provide knowledge and perspectives that could help your people rediscover what they've lost. And in return? Humans get to join a galactic empire as equal partners rather than as subjects or specimens. We get access to technology and knowledge that could transform our own civilization, and we get to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Saralith resumed her pacing, but now there was excitement in her movements rather than restlessness. A cultural exchange program on an interstellar scale. Human advisors and teachers working throughout the Empire to help Zephyrians rediscover emotional and aesthetic experiences. Exactly. And Zephyrian knowledge and technology helping humanity solve our own problems and expand into the galaxy. The logistical challenges would be unprecedented. The political implications would destabilize existing power structures throughout the Empire. The resistance from traditionalist factions would be severe. Marcus grinned. But think about how much fun it would be. Saralith stopped pacing and stared at him. Then, to his amazement, she laughed again, a sound that was becoming more natural each time he heard it. Marcus Chen, she said, I am beginning to understand why your species has been so successful despite its obvious inefficiencies. You do not merely adapt to challenges, you transform them into opportunities for growth. It's one of our better qualities. Indeed. Very well. When we reach the Imperial Core Worlds, we will present your proposal to the High Council. But I warn you, convincing my advisors to support such a radical departure from established policy will require evidence that your approach can produce measurable results. What kind of evidence? Saralith's smile was sharp and predatory, but for the first time since he'd met her, it was also warm. We will have to demonstrate that this partnership between our species can work on a personal level before we can expect others to accept it on a galactic scale. Marcus felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension. You want to be test subjects for your own experiment. I want to discover whether a human and a Zephyrian can form the kind of emotional connection you have described, whether such a connection can indeed produce benefits that outweigh its inefficiencies. And if we can't, then we will have learned something valuable about the limitations of interspecies cooperation. Marcus extended his hand toward her, a gesture that he realized she might not understand but felt compelled to make anyway. Partners. Saralith stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then slowly reached out to take it in her own crystalline fingers. Her touch was warm, and he could feel a subtle vibration that might have been some form of energy, or simply the rhythm of her alien circulatory system. Partners, she agreed, though I suspect you have just committed us both to the most challenging experiment either of our species has ever attempted. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, surprised by how natural the gesture felt despite their obvious differences. The best experiments are usually the ones that challenge everything you thought you knew. As they stood together in the observation chamber, hands clasped, watching alien stars wheel past beyond the ship's transparent walls, Marcus realized that they had just fundamentally altered the nature of their relationship. They were no longer just empress and genetic donor, or even teacher and student. They had become genuine collaborators in an undertaking that could transform both their species. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. The Eternal Dominion dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyros system, and Marcus felt his breath catch as he got his first glimpse of the heart of an interstellar empire. Through the observation deck's transparent walls, he could see a sight that challenged everything he thought he knew about the scale of galactic civilization. Zephyros Prime hung in space like a crystalline jewel, its surface reflecting light from the system's twin suns in geometric patterns that suggested the entire planet had been deliberately reshaped for aesthetic as well as functional purposes. But it was the space around the planet that truly overwhelmed him. Orbital installations stretched as far as the eye could see, connected by streams of light that might have been transportation systems or communication networks. Ships moved between them in patterns so complex and coordinated that they resembled the migration flights of birds. How many people live here? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Zephyros system houses approximately 8 billion Zephyrians across 14 orbital cities in the planetary surface, Saraleth replied, joining him at the observation window. It is one of our smaller population centers. Smaller? Marcus turned to stare at her. This is what you call a smaller population center? The Empire spans 3 galactic arms, Marcus. Some of our systems house populations in the hundreds of billions. Zephyros Prime serves primarily as a governmental and cultural center rather than an industrial one. As the ship moved closer to the planet, Marcus could make out individual structures on its surface, and he realized that calling them buildings was inadequate. They were architectural marvels that seemed to grow from the planet's crystalline landscape like organic formations, their surfaces flowing and shifting as they caught and redirected sunlight in patterns that were both beautiful and hypnotically complex. It's incredible, he said, but also cold, Saraleth finished for him. Yes. You are seeing the result of 2 millennia of optimization-focused development. Every structure serves a specific function. Every transportation route is calculated for maximum efficiency. Every surface is designed to maximize either productivity or resource utilization. Marcus studied the planet below them with growing understanding. Despite its obvious grandeur, there was something sterile about the landscape. The geometric precision was beautiful in an abstract way, but it felt artificial, as if the world had been designed by beings who understood mathematical beauty but had forgotten what it meant to simply enjoy looking at something. Where are the parks, he asked suddenly. Parks? Open spaces. Places where people go just to relax and enjoy themselves. Areas with plants and water features and places to sit and think. Such spaces would be inefficient uses of valuable real estate, Saraleth said, but her tone suggested she was beginning to question that assumption. Zephyrians do not require recreational spaces for psychological health. Are you sure about that? Saraleth was quiet for several minutes as the ship continued its approach to the planet. Finally she spoke, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. I am beginning to question many assumptions I have held for centuries. The landing process was as seamlessly efficient as everything else Marcus had experienced in Zephyrian technology. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere without any sensation of movement, and they touched down at what Saraleth identified as the Imperial Landing Complex with barely a whisper of contact. My advisors are waiting to meet you, Saraleth said as they prepared to disembark. I should warn you that they may be skeptical of your presence here. Because I'm human? Because you represent a variable they have not planned for. Zephyrians prefer predictability. Marcus followed Saraleth through the ship's corridors to what he presumed was an airlock, though it looked more like another flowing archway in the crystalline walls. As they stepped through it onto the planet's surface, Marcus felt a moment of disorientation as his body adjusted to the slightly different gravity and atmospheric composition. The landing complex stretched around them like a vast cathedral made of living crystal. The ceiling arched high overhead, supported by columns that seemed to twist and flow like frozen waterfalls. Light moved through the structure in patterns that suggested both natural phenomena and deliberate design, creating an environment that was undeniably beautiful but somehow empty of warmth. Impressive, Marcus said, looking around at the architectural marvel surrounding them. The landing complex was completed 3 centuries ago as a demonstration of Zephyrian engineering capabilities, Saraleth explained. It serves as both a functional transportation hub and a symbol of imperial power. But where are all the people? Marcus's question was answered as they moved deeper into the complex. Zephyrians began to appear, moving through the space with the same fluid grace that characterized Saraleth's movements. But there was something profoundly different about the way they interacted with their environment and each other. They moved like sleepwalkers, Marcus realized. Precise, predetermined paths through the complex. When 2 Zephyrians encountered each other, they acknowledged the meeting with brief, formal gestures before continuing on their separate ways. There was no idle conversation, no lingering to enjoy each other's company, no apparent recognition that they were sharing space with others of their kind. This is normal behavior for your people? Marcus asked quietly. Efficient behavior, Saraleth corrected, but he noticed that her own posture had subtly changed since they'd arrived. She had become more formal, more rigid, as if the planet's atmosphere was influencing her psychology. They were met by a delegation of 6 Zephyrians who appeared to be officials of some kind, though Marcus found it difficult to distinguish between them. They all possessed the same crystalline beauty as Saraleth, the same luminous skin and flowing movements, but there was a uniformity to their appearance that seemed almost deliberate. Empress, the lead figure said, inclining his head in a gesture that managed to convey respect while maintaining perfect dignity. We welcome you home. The High Council awaits your report. Thank you, Advisor Kethril, Saraleth replied, her voice taking on formal tones that Marcus hadn't heard her use aboard the ship. "Allow me to present Marcus Chen, the human genetic template we discussed in our preliminary communications." Marcus felt 6 pairs of luminous eyes focus on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He had the uncomfortable sensation of being studied like a laboratory specimen, evaluated and catalogued rather than recognized as a sentient being. "The genetic material appears to be in acceptable condition," Advisor Kethril observed, speaking about Marcus as if he weren't present. "Our preliminary scans confirm the presence of the antibody sequences identified in your initial analysis." "Marcus is not genetic material," Saraleth said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that caused the advisors to look at her with obvious surprise. "He is a sentient being and our partner in the genetic restoration project. He will be treated with appropriate dignity." The advisors exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey entire conversations without words. Marcus realized he was witnessing the kind of telepathic communication that Saraleth had mentioned, and he felt suddenly isolated in a way that had nothing to do with being on an alien world. "Of course, Empress," Advisor Kethril said smoothly. "The human will be accorded all appropriate considerations. Shall we proceed to the council chambers?" As they moved through the complex toward what Marcus presumed was some kind of governmental center, he found himself studying the Zephyrians they passed with growing fascination and concern. Every individual they encountered displayed the same efficient, purposeful behavior he had observed earlier. No one seemed to engage in casual social interaction. No one appeared to be doing anything that wasn't directly related to some specific task or function. "Saraleth," he said quietly, "is it always like this?" "Like what?" "So impersonal. On Earth, when you have this many people in one place, there's noise and conversation and chaos. People stop to talk to each other, they laugh, they argue, they show emotion. Such behaviors would be disruptive to the efficient flow of foot traffic through public spaces," Saraleth replied, but Marcus noticed that her tone lacked conviction. "But doesn't anyone ever just enjoy being around other people?" "Zephyrians derive satisfaction from successful completion of assigned tasks and achievement of predetermined goals." Marcus was about to respond when they arrived at the entrance to what could only be described as the most impressive governmental building he had ever seen. The structure rose from the planet's surface like a mountain made of crystalline light, its faceted surfaces catching and reflecting the twin suns' radiance in patterns that seemed to shift and flow with hypnotic complexity. "The Imperial Administrative Complex," Saraleth announced. "Seat of government for the Zephyrian Empire and home to the High Council." Inside, the building was even more magnificent than its exterior had suggested. Vast chambers stretched in all directions, their walls covered with what appeared to be constantly updating displays of information from across the Empire. Marcus caught glimpses of star charts, population statistics, resource allocation matrices, and military deployment schedules, all flowing past in streams of data that were beautiful but utterly incomprehensible to him. "The High Council will evaluate your proposal and determine the optimal course of action for implementing the genetic restoration project," Advisor Kethril explained as they walked through corridors that seemed designed to inspire awe and a sense of insignificance in equal measure. "What happens if they decide not to approve it?" Marcus asked. "The Council makes decisions based on careful analysis of all available data," the advisor replied. "Personal preferences do not enter into the calculation." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's temperature. "And if the data suggests that the project isn't worth pursuing, then alternative solutions will be explored." "What kind of alternatives?" Advisor Kethril didn't answer, but the meaningful look he exchanged with Saraleth told Marcus everything he needed to know. If the Council decided that voluntary cooperation wasn't the most efficient approach, they would consider other options that might not require his consent. They arrived at a set of doors that were so massive and ornate that they could only lead to the most important chamber in the building. As the doors opened with silent, perfect precision, Marcus got his first look at the heart of galactic government. The High Council chamber was a circular room with a dome ceiling that showed a real-time view of the galaxy beyond. 12 Zephyrians sat in chairs arranged around the chamber's perimeter, each positioned at what Marcus realized were optimal viewing angles to observe whoever stood in the center of the room, which was, he understood with growing apprehension, exactly where he was supposed to be. Empress Saraleth, the council member directly across from the entrance, spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Present your findings." Saraleth moved to the center of the chamber, and Marcus was struck by how small she looked in the vast space, despite her impressive stature. "Honored counselors, I have successfully identified and secured the cooperation of a human genetic template whose DNA contains the antibody sequences we require." "Cooperation?" Another council member spoke, their tone suggesting disapproval. Our analysis indicated that simple biological extraction would be sufficient for our needs. Initial analysis was incomplete, Saraleth replied. Human genetic expression is more complex than our models predicted. Optimal results require active participation from conscious subjects. Marcus watched the council members as Saraleth spoke, noting the subtle ways they communicated with each other through gestures and expressions that were almost too quick to catch. He had the unsettling feeling that entire conversations were taking place around him in languages he couldn't understand. Furthermore, Saraleth continued, preliminary research suggests that our genetic decline may be related to factors beyond simple biological degradation. Explain, the lead counselor commanded. Human genetic vitality appears to be correlated with emotional and social factors that Zephyrian society has optimized out of existence. If we wish to truly solve our reproductive crisis, we may need to address these underlying causes rather than simply treating symptoms. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. The council members stared at Saraleth with expressions that suggested she had just proposed something either revolutionary or heretical. You are suggesting, the lead counselor said slowly, that we alter fundamental aspects of Zephyrian society based on the cultural practices of a primitive species? I am suggesting that we consider all available solutions to ensure our survival. And the human? Another counselor gestured toward Marcus without looking at him directly. What role would it play in this proposed cultural modification project? Marcus realized that this was his moment. Whatever happened next would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. If I may, he said, stepping forward slightly, I'd like to speak for myself. The council members turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Marcus felt the full weight of their attention like a physical presence. These beings had ruled an interstellar empire for millennia. They commanded fleets that could destroy worlds and technologies that seemed like magic to human understanding, and they were all focused on him, waiting to hear what he had to say. Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything. Honored counselors, I know that from your perspective, humans must seem primitive and inefficient. We're younger than your civilization, we haven't mastered interstellar travel, and we waste enormous amounts of time and energy on things that don't serve obvious practical purposes. He paused, looking around the chamber at the 12 faces watching him with alien intensity. But we're also survivors. In the time it takes your species to live one lifetime, humans have gone from bronze tools to space travel. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed less adaptable species, and we've done it not by becoming more efficient, but by becoming more connected to each other. Marcus gestured toward Saraleth. Your Empress asked me to help save your people, and I agreed because I believe that's the right thing to do. But I've learned something during our time together. Saving the Zephyrian Empire isn't just about introducing new genetic material into your reproduction process. It's about helping you rediscover what makes life worth preserving in the first place. He could feel the tension in the room rising, but he pressed on. You've optimized your society so perfectly that you've optimized out the very things that make existence meaningful. You don't dream, you don't play, you don't form emotional bonds with each other. You've achieved perfect efficiency at the cost of everything that makes life more than just survival. And you believe, the lead counselor said, their voice carrying undertones of skepticism, that incorporating human inefficiencies into Zephyrian society would improve our survival prospects. I believe that life finds a way to continue when it has something to continue for. Right now, your people are going through the motions of existence without any real investment in the future. Maybe that's why your birth rates are declining. Maybe on some unconscious level, your species has decided that a universe without joy, without wonder, without love, isn't worth perpetuating. The chamber erupted into what Marcus realized was the Zephyrian equivalent of heated debate, though it took the form of rapid exchanges of light patterns and harmonic tones rather than raised voices. He stood in the center of it all, feeling like he had just lit a fuse without knowing how big the explosion would be. Finally, the lead counselor raised their hand, and silence returned to the chamber. Human, they said, addressing Marcus directly for the first time. You propose a fundamental alteration of Zephyrian civilization based on theories that have no empirical support. I propose an experiment, Marcus replied, one that could save your people or teach you something valuable about what doesn't work. Either way, you learn something you didn't know before. And if the experiment fails? If introducing human inefficiencies into our society causes more damage than our current problems? Marcus looked around the chamber at 12 faces that represented the accumulated wisdom and authority of an interstellar empire. Then he smiled, the same expression that had gotten him into trouble throughout his entire life. Then at least you'll fail doing something interesting instead of just slowly fading away. The council's response would determine the fate of both their species. and Marcus Chen, data analyst from Seattle, was about to find out whether humans really were as persuasive as they liked to think they were. The High Council's deliberation lasted 18 hours. Marcus spent most of that time in what Sarah Leth diplomatically called guest quarters, but which felt suspiciously like a very comfortable prison cell. The room was beautiful, spacious, and equipped with everything he could possibly need, but the door wouldn't open when he approached it, and the windows showed only the geometric perfection of the city beyond. Sarah Leth visited him once during the wait, appearing as silently as she had that first day in his apartment, though now she seemed somehow diminished by the formal environment of her home world. "How do you think they'll decide?" Marcus asked, as she stood by the window looking out at the crystalline spires of the capital city. "The Council operates by consensus. They will analyze all available data, model probable outcomes, and select the course of action that offers the highest probability of achieving desired results with minimal risk." "That's not what I asked. I asked what you think they'll decide." Saralith turned to study him with that intense gaze that had become familiar. "You were asking for my personal opinion rather than my analysis of their decision-making process." "Exactly. I believe," she said slowly, "that your proposal terrifies them. The idea of voluntarily introducing an efficiency into optimized systems contradicts everything they have been taught to value. But I also believe they are intelligent enough to recognize that our current approach is failing. And you? What do you want them to decide?" Saralith was quiet for a long moment. 3 weeks ago I would have told you that my personal desires were irrelevant to the requirements of imperial governance, but you have introduced me to concepts that have altered my perspective on leadership and responsibility, such as the possibility that a ruler's greatest duty might be to help her people flourish rather than simply survive. Before Marcus could respond, the door chimed with a soft harmonic tone, and Advisor Kethril appeared in the doorway. "The Council has reached a decision," he announced. "Your presence is requested in the chamber immediately." As they walked through the corridors of the administrative complex, Marcus found himself paying attention to details he had missed during his first visit. The building was undeniably magnificent, but it was also profoundly lonely. Individual Zephyrians moved through the spaces with perfect efficiency, but they never paused to interact with each other unless required by their specific duties. It was like watching a civilization of beautiful ghosts going through the motions of life without ever truly connecting. The High Council chamber looked exactly as it had during their previous session, except that now there were additional figures present. Marcus counted at least 30 Zephyrians arranged around the chamber's perimeter, all of them watching the central space where he and Saralith took their positions. After extensive deliberation and analysis, the lead counselor announced, "The High Council has reached a determination regarding the proposed genetic restoration project and associated cultural modification initiatives." Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited to learn his fate. Human genetic material will be integrated into Zephyrian reproductive protocols under carefully controlled conditions to combat the biological degradation affecting our species. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but the counselor wasn't finished. However, the proposed cultural modification project presents unacceptable risks to imperial stability and social order. The introduction of human emotional and social practices into Zephyrian society could destabilize institutions that have maintained order across the Empire for millennia. "Honored counselors," Saralith interjected, "if the genetic project proceeds without addressing the underlying causes of our reproductive decline, we may see only temporary improvement before the problem recurs. That possibility has been considered. If the genetic intervention proves insufficient, alternative solutions will be explored at that time." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What exactly are you saying?" The lead counselor fixed him with that alien stare. "You will provide the genetic material necessary for our survival. In return, you will be provided with comfortable accommodations and all necessary resources for the remainder of your natural lifespan." "You're talking about keeping me as a prisoner?" "We are talking about ensuring the continuation of our species while minimizing risk to imperial stability." "Anne,"